Welcome back, friends. As most of you know, this will be my last full case video. We have one more video after this where I'll be sharing updates on past cases we've covered on Nameless and Dark Matters. That one will be a little differently formatted. It won't be formatted like Dark Matters. It's going to be more of a casual video. I didn't intend for this particular video to be the last one when I started researching it a year ago now. Patrons voted on this case July 2018, and it originally started out with two victims, Cinda and Charlotte, who vanished from Oklahoma City in 1981. But after I began my research, I came across a suspect in Cinda and Charlotte's case that was connected to the disappearance of another girl, Sharon Baldeagle, in Wyoming, as well as a kidnapping and sexual assault there. Then I found out about the Rawlins rodeo murders, when Jaylene Banker and Christy Gross were murdered, and Carlene Brown and Deborah Ray Meyer disappeared within a short span of time. The possible connection between the girls is intriguing, but more importantly, there are all names I had never heard before, so I decided to bring all of them to your attention. Though I can't concretely say the cases are all connected, I can take you back to the summer of 1974 in Rawlins, Wyoming, where it all started. On July 4th, 1974, the community of Rawlins, Wyoming had an approximate population of 7,800. The town was peaceful and a quiet community, but for the first time in several years, the 4th of July Renegade Roundup celebration was set to be a noisy day with the return of a fireworks display. But Independence Day faded from everyone's minds over the next 7 weeks when the disappearances started. Carlene Brown was born on January 14th, 1955, into a less conventional family situation. The identity of her biological parents is unknown, and sometime before 1974, her adoptive parents divorced. So, Carlene split her time between her father, Carl Brown, in Rawlins, where he owned a dry cleaning store called Model Cleaners, and her mother, Catherine Ghosh, who resided in Colorado Springs. In 1974, Carlene lived in Rawlins while working for her father, but was looking for an outdoor job for the summer. The 19-year-old was a reported hard worker, yet still fun-loving, with undecided plans for the future following her graduation from Rawlins High School in 1973. Carlene seemed like a social young woman, participating in band, debate team, pep club, drama events, and several different sports, all during her time in high school. On July 4th, 1974, Carlene planned to attend the Little Britches Rodeo with her best friend since toddlerhood, Mary Kay Albrechtson. However, Mary, pregnant at the time, woke that morning feeling ill and had to cancel. So Carlene contacted another friend, Christy Ann Gross, who was in town visiting that day from her home in Bodle, South Dakota. The two girls set off to the Carbon County Fairgrounds, only planning to be gone for a short time, but that night, neither girl returned home. According to local historian Rance Banker, authorities initially speculated the girls intentionally left town on their own, or that they were, quote, picked up on the highway. But as time passed, they started to consider the possibility that the girls' disappearances weren't voluntary. Carlene's best friend, Mary, told the Billings Gazette, "I think at first a lot of people thought that Carlene had taken off with someone and would be gone for a while. That was typical of her, just to take off and go have fun. I think maybe after a week or so, people got to realizing that she just didn't take off. She was gone too long." There were a couple of contradictory reports on the girls' car. I'm not sure which one is true, but one report claimed that their van was found at the fairgrounds. The other report says that their car was abandoned over 200 miles north of Rawlins in Worland, Wyoming. Regardless, an entire month passed without any significant updates. A month later to the day, 14-year-old Deborah Ray Meyer was visiting relatives in Rawlins. Away from her home in Red Lodge, Montana, Deborah decided to walk to the local movie theater. She was seen near 7th and Spruce Street, but never arrived at the theater for her viewing, and by nightfall, she hadn't returned home. There isn't much information on Deborah herself or the circumstances surrounding an investigation into her disappearance, unfortunately. Out of all of the victims, she seems to have received the least amount of press, perhaps because she wasn't local to the area, but her disappearance obviously still matters, especially concerning the timeline we're looking at. Later that same month, on August 23rd, Rawlins hosted the Carbon County Rodeo, located on the same fairgrounds where Christy Gross and Carlene Brown were headed when they disappeared. 10-year-old Cayleigh Dawn Banker lived with her family just 5 blocks from those fairgrounds, and they made plans to attend the rodeo that day. Cayleigh, though shy, loved going to the fair, but on this day she somehow became separated from her group. She was last seen standing alone near the popcorn stand before heading off by herself in the direction of her home. When Cayleigh went missing, the response was very different from Carlene, Christy, and Deborah's disappearances. Maybe because she was the youngest and a local, but authorities never believed she ran away. Over 100 resident volunteers went door to door and distributed flyers to the public and truck drivers who placed them in restaurants and stops across the country. When word of Cayleigh's disappearance spread, a $15,000 reward was offered for information on her whereabouts, with strangers as far away as Illinois and California chipping in. The first lead came when a girl matching Cayleigh's description was spotted in the back of a car in Casper, Wyoming, about 115 miles north of Rawlins. Police tracked down the car, and while they located a stolen dealer's plate inside, they found no evidence related to the disappearance. Later, 2 men confirmed to be in Rawlins at the time Cayleigh vanished were arrested in Salt Lake City, Utah, for a traffic violation. However, after police questioned them, they ruled out their involvement. In October of 1974, the FBI briefly questioned a man named Meyerhofer, but they couldn't trace him directly to Rawlins at the time in question, and seemed to have ruled him out as a connection. By Christmas, there was still no promising leads. Cayleigh's mother told the Grand Prairie Daily News, "I believe she is alive, and I hope to God whoever's got her gives her some sort of Christmas. I hope decent people have her. Cayleigh's 8-year-old brother keeps saying when Cayleigh comes back, they're going to have Christmas all over again just for her, even if it's in July." Unfortunately, Cayleigh's gifts remained unopened, and there was little to celebrate come April 24th, 1975. That day, Mike Winterline, a city engineer, took his dog out for a walk and stumbled upon decomposed remains face down in some brush, about 2 miles southwest of Rawlins, not far from the town's gravel pits. The body was still partially clothed in a t-shirt, socks, and tennis shoes, with several other items of clothing scattered nearby. Authorities confirmed the remains as Cayleigh Dawn Banker. Carbon County Coroner Larry Schreiner performed the autopsy and determined Cayleigh's cause of death, a homicide, caused by a severe blow to the head. Her murder has never been solved. 8 years following Cayleigh's discovery, the community discovers another set of remains, approximately 3 miles north of Rawlins, off-road. They were sent off to the local medical examiner's office, who positively identified the body using dental records and a one-of-a-kind 1950s ring made by Christy Gross's uncle, which she had been wearing when she disappeared. Her cause of death was similar to Cayleigh's, homicide from at least 2 strikes to the head by a blunt object. Several weeks later, Carbon County Deputy Sheriff Jeff Fakosh claimed authorities had fresh leads on Christy's discovery and even a suspect, who was never publicly identified. That suspect was later located, but police didn't have enough evidence to obtain a warrant, and I couldn't find any further information on this particular lead. 2 years before Christie's body was found and nearly 900 miles southeast of Rawlins, two 13-year-old friends, Cinda Leanne Pallett and Charlotte June Kinsey, planned to attend the Oklahoma State Fair in Oklahoma City. Charlotte was one of 3 daughters to Perla Peterson and Otis Kinsey, all of whom were cheerleaders. Despite cheering for Jefferson Middle School, Charlotte was an extremely shy and sensitive girl, so socially anxious that she had actually once backed out of an interview. She spent her free time reading poetry and roller skating or going to arcades with her friend, Cinda Pallett. Born on May 13, 1968, Cinda was seemingly Charlotte's opposite. She complained at 13 that she wasn't legally allowed to work anywhere as she wanted to save money for upcoming holiday gifts. Still, she saved up enough for Van Halen tickets for a concert the week after the fair. Cinda and Charlotte found common ground in their athleticism. Cinda was a shortstop on a local softball team and planned to try out for her school's basketball team when the new year started. Unfortunately, neither girl would see the first day of school. Saturday, September 26, 1981, approximately noon. Cinda and Charlotte meet up at the Oklahoma State Fairgrounds without their parents, proclaiming that they were old enough to wander the grounds without constant supervision. Unfortunately, that day a predator stalked the fairgrounds as Cinda and Charlotte enjoyed the rides and festivities. At some point, a bearded man in his 40s or 50s approached the girls with 2 teenage boys at his side. Before we continue, I want to note something. It is widely reported that Cinda and Charlotte attended the fair with their boyfriends, these same 2 boys. However, later court testimonies confirm that Cinda, Charlotte, and the boys, Lance Rumsey and Brian Head, met for the first time on this day when the bearded man offered them all jobs. The man wore a leather belt tooled with the name Joseph in addition to a yellow badge and claimed he worked for the carnival. He asked the 4 teens if they'd like to make some money unloading stuffed animals from a truck for the fair. The girls agreed, but Charlotte wanted to call and ask permission from her mother first. Perla Peterson reluctantly says Charlotte can go under one condition, that she call home again around 9 p.m. that night from Cinda's house where the girls planned to spend the night. Perla never heard her daughter's voice again. The man and the 4 teenagers piled into a 1980 or 1981 Pontiac Grand Prix with South Dakota license tags. The man said he was supposed to meet the driver of the semi-truck filled with the toys, but when he pulled over to a rest stop just off of I-40, he didn't see the truck or the driver. He gives the boys $10 to wait at the rest stop in case the semi arrives while he and the girls go check the next stop. Brian and Lance watched Cinda and Charlotte waving from the back seat as the Grand Prix vanished from view. That night, Cinda and Charlotte's mothers grow increasingly worried when neither girl calls or returns home, so they report them missing. Around 30 officers, both uniformed and undercover, scour the fair looking for any suspicious individuals or any signs of Cinda and Charlotte. Volunteers go booth to booth hanging posters and spreading the word while both families conduct their own searches. 10 of Charlotte's relatives set up a 24-hour post at the fair, which continued on as scheduled the following weekend. Even with increased police presence, there was a drop in 9,000 of the expected crowds for the weekend. The city was clearly on edge. Over the next couple of weeks, the Kinseys and Palletts endured the emotional roller coaster of numerous unconfirmed and false sightings, manned their phones around the clock, printed flyers, and offered a $1,000 reward for information on the girls' whereabouts. This, in addition to donations of $5,000 by the Foundation for Improved Police Protection, $2,500 from Crime Stoppers, and a fund raised by the students of Highland West Middle School. Amidst the searching, detectives worked to piece together exactly what happened to Cinda and Charlotte. After answering questions, Lance Rumsey and Brian Head helped authorities develop a composite sketch and description of the bearded man, which police sent to other law enforcement agencies and posted on the missing flyers. The man wore silver, wire-rimmed glasses, a flimsy straw hat on his head, a cowboy shirt with brown stripes, and was somewhere in his 40s or 50s. Witnesses said the man spoke to several other children at the fair, also offering them jobs for $10 an hour. Police ruled out the involvement of any fair employees. The yellow badge that the bearded man wore wasn't worn by any fair officials. However, it remained possible that he worked for an independent booth, but detectives thought that the badge was more likely a ruse to gain the girls' trust and not a connection to the fair itself. That badge was actually later found, but there are conflicting reports as to where. In one report, it was found at the rest stop parking lot where Lance and Brian last saw Cinda and Charlotte, and another source claims that carnival goers found it on fairgrounds and turned it over to the police. Regardless, the badge gave police their first major lead, a name and a picture that Lance and Brian identified as the very same man who'd driven away with the girls, a drifting carnival worker named Don Corey. Police Lieutenant Adam Edwards announced the nationwide search for 36-year-old Don Corey, who had ties to both Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and Plano, Texas, but no solid roots anywhere. He worked the Southern and Midwest carnival circuits to earn a living, and was in Oklahoma City at the state fair. Other workers remembered him and how he'd unexpectedly quit the week prior to Charlotte and Cinda's disappearance. He'd left the city sometime before or on the 25th of September. However, the police couldn't concretely place him at the carnival the day that the girls were taken. This didn't stop them from charging Corey with 2 counts of kidnapping. Both neighboring states' police forces and the FBI kept careful watch on hospitals, knowing Corey had an addiction to the painkiller Demerol, which he had developed when seeking relief from a painful stomach ulcer. And authorities were right. Corey was spotted at 3 different hospitals in Mississippi in early October, and one other time pawning a ring. There was no sign of Cinda or Charlotte during any of these sightings. Friday, October 9th, Greenville, Alabama's local fair begins. Not far away, Don Corey walked into a police station, seeking a background check that he needed in order to apply for financial aid at a local church. However, upon searching his name, officers arrested Corey, much to his surprise. In the time Corey had traveled from Oklahoma to Tennessee and Mississippi and Alabama, he had no idea he was a wanted man. Police took possession of Corey's Texas and South Dakota driver's licenses in addition to his 1976 Oldsmobile. While the vehicle was searched for evidence, Greenville police briefly questioned Corey just before his lawyer arrived. Hours later, Perla Peterson's phone rings. Lieutenant Adam Edwards is on the other end of the line and informs her that Corey is in custody, but hasn't revealed anything about Cinda and Charlotte yet. Unfortunately, the more that police spoke with Corey, the more they doubted his involvement. A signed search warrant and careful sweep of his vehicle corroborated that neither girl had been in Corey's car. Then Brian Head and Lance Rumsey and 5 other children who encountered the bearded man failed to identify Corey in a police lineup, and Corey's alibi in Dallas, Texas checked out. Tuesday, October 20th, the kidnapping charges against Don Corey were dropped. However, Oklahoma's district attorney, Robert Macy, did file charges for his fraudulent means of obtaining Demerol. Corey agreed to check himself into a rehabilitation program in exchange for the charges being dropped, and he later returned to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, to his family, ready for a clean slate. The press made transitioning to a quiet life difficult, though, straining his attempts to move forward and his relationships. He eventually kicked his Demerol habit and said this of the whole incident: "I'd like to find the guy who did this. There are a lot of things I'd like to ask him. I hope for their folks that they do find their 2 girls." A month after their disappearances, police are back at square one. They release a new, further detailed description of their suspect. A man aged between 35 and 50, 6 feet 1 inch to 6 feet 3 inches tall, weighing 200 to 250 pounds with a stocky build, hairy, muscular arms, and a full, dark, gray-streaked beard and mustache. He wore a leather belt with the name Joseph tooled into it, a digital watch on his left wrist, a flimsy straw cowboy hat on his head, a plaid shirt, and cowboy boots. He had a nervous habit of pushing his glasses up on his nose and walked deliberately and quickly at every sighting. He drove off with the girls in a tan two-door Grand Prix with a half-vinyl roof and numerous papers scattered on the dashboard. Unfortunately, Cinda and Charlotte's families noticed that public interest was waning. Less journalists calling for stories and less updates from authorities. So, Perla Peterson publicly released 2 letters to the press, one for her daughter and one to her kidnapper, pleading for her safe return, asking Charlotte to call home, and telling her that she loved her. Another month passed without progress, and the reward pool increased while the special task force assigned to the missing girls was cut from 11 to 6 detectives, as old leads were ruled out and the influx of new information lessened. On Christmas, Charlotte's presents remained unopened under the tree. Then it was summer again, and the Oklahoma State Fair returned to the city, bringing with it painful memories for the girls' families. With an overwhelming wish that she could redo that day over, Perla Peterson handed out flyers at the fairgrounds asking for people to keep an eye out. Cinda's father stayed away, though. While he thought Cinda was alive somewhere, he didn't think that she would turn up at the fair and was overcome by the painful memories. Carnival workers from previous years were disheartened that neither Charlotte nor Cinda had been found yet. In the years following their disappearance, the main ripples of news were unconfirmed sightings from Florida to Maryland and California. In New Jersey, a woman claimed she'd spotted the girls amongst 5 Hispanic men in work clothes on the Funtown Pier, near a residence in Seaside Park. She positively ID'd the girls' photos, but all sightings remain unconfirmed. Then, in May of 1984, there was a spark of hope. NBC aired a broadcast of the story of Adam Walsh, who was murdered, leading his father, John Walsh, to later host the TV show America's Most Wanted. After the program aired, a child locator center in Florida received a call from a woman claiming to be Cinda Pallett. However, after 5 hours on the phone with her, authorities traced the calls to an 18-year-old out of Virginia who had a history of mental illness and ultimately ruled out any connection to the case. The false sightings and leads weighed on both families. They admitted that they, quote, tempered their optimism at every new development after numerous letdowns. Then, January 27th, 1985, police finally stumbled upon a solid lead. Authorities began questioning a former resident of Tuttle, Oklahoma, who'd recently been convicted of kidnapping and assaulting 2 underage girls in Wyoming. One of the girls escaped, and the other has never been seen again. The Cheyenne River Sioux Indian Reservation, South Dakota, September 18th, 1984. Tribal elder Taylor Baldeagle notices his daughter, Sharon Baldeagle, isn't home. 12-year-old Sharon, the oldest of 4 children, recently started at a new school in Hot Springs. Sharon loved her father, took pride in participating in tribal dances, and was eager to learn more about cooking when she and her 15-year-old friend, Sandy Brokenleg, ran away. The reason for their departure is unknown, but the girls' destination was Idaho. They were spotted hitchhiking in Casper, Wyoming on September 19th by a local man named Royal Russell Long. Long pulled over in his truck and picked Sharon and Sandy up. Sandy's testimony and Long's version of events are very different from this point. First, I'm going to relay the events from Sandy Brokenleg's statements and what was reported in newspapers, and we'll get to Long's claims after that. Sandy claims Long planned to get the girls food, then take them back to his house so they could clean up and eat. The three end up back at Long's home in nearby Evansville, where he offers the girls $100 in exchange for sexual services, which they refused. Long then restrained both Sandy and Sharon, held them at gunpoint, beat Sharon, and raped Sandy. At some point, Long fell asleep and Sandy escaped and snuck away to a neighbor who called the police. However, before authorities arrived, Long drove away with Sharon. She has never been seen again. A week later, Long was apprehended by the FBI in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where, upon searching his car, they found 2 stuffed animals inside. Long claimed that the last time he saw Sharon, he had dropped her off with a truck driver in Cheyenne who was bound for Dallas, Texas. Sharon's father didn't buy this story and felt upset at what he perceived as a casual approach to locate his missing daughter. He said if police took proper initiative, Long would have been captured before he could even leave the state. Now, I'm going to give you Long's version of events, and I think it's important to note the difference. It's also important to remember that we don't know and will probably never know the full truth. Only Long, Sharon, and Sandy hold that knowledge. Long claims the girls told him that they were 18 and 19. Later, he said while the girls, quote, looked the part, he said he should have known that they weren't that old. He offered the girls a meal, a place to shower and wash their clothes, and a ride to a truck stop west of town. The girls agreed, but didn't want to eat at a restaurant, so Long bought them groceries before driving them back to his home. He then offered, quote, a little insight to the girls concerning an exchange of sexual favors he says takes place between hitchhikers and the truckers who provide them transport and food. Long says sexual favors didn't occur to him when he first picked up Sandy and Sharon, as he had a headache and stomach pains that day from dysentery. However, when asked why he propositioned the girls at all, he responded with, quote, I wasn't that sick. Take that how you will. Long says initially Sandy was outraged by the suggestion, but later agreed because she needed money to get to Idaho. After the consensual exchange, Long claims she demanded $200 from him or she would accuse him of rape. At this point, the girls revealed their actual ages, 15 and 12, which Long says nearly gave him a heart attack as it would ruin his reputation and local business. When reasoning with them didn't work, Long says there was a scuffle, he received a bloody nose, but says that he never hit the girls. He threatened them with a pistol, then tied them up with coat hangers and electrical cords. Upon waking from a nap, Long finds Sandy gone. At this point, he, quote, carried the other one to my truck. I stopped once for gas and drove to Cheyenne over the back roads. She was a hot potato. I just wanted her out of my hands. Then he claims he arranged a ride for Sharon with a trucker in a light-colored rig headed to Dallas. Retrospectively, he said it was a mistake to send her off. After, Long says he stayed at a motel in Denver to mull things over and was on his way back to Casper when he learned that he was a wanted man. He drives to Amarillo, Texas, searching for anyone that might have seen Sharon. Authorities were unable to identify or even find the driver or the truck that Long spoke of. He was in Albuquerque trying to arrange a money transfer from friends in Casper when FBI agents arrested him. Long said he offered to undergo a truth serum questioning by authorities, but his attorney advised him to refuse a polygraph, so it appears that neither happened. Taylor Baldeagle spent 2 months doing everything in his power to find Sharon, traveling as far as Arizona before a truck driver made him realize he was neglecting his other children back home. So he returned to Eagle Butte, hoping for a lead that would bring his daughter home. There were unconfirmed sightings of Sharon in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and Westminster, Colorado. In June of 1985, authorities received morbid information: the possible location of Sharon's remains. I can't find a concrete statement of who provided the lead, but I think it was a cell block mate of Long's. Accused murderer Shannon Parazu told prosecutors in Long's case that he could lead them to Sharon's body. Parazu was paid by Long's defense to aid in the search for Sharon and was released from jail to help investigators. 15 men searched between Natrona and Converse County, some on horseback to navigate the rough terrain, others utilizing scent dogs. They came away empty-handed, but Sheriff John Barrett says that he is convinced that Sharon's body was close by. One report mentioned that Long allegedly told a fellow inmate that cutting up the bodies small enough to stuff them into a rat hole would ensure that they would never be unearthed. But again, this was one report, and it's unknown if Parazoo reported this information or if another unnamed inmate did. There's no concrete way to prove that he said it at all, just from the articles that I found. Long pled not guilty to 6 charges in connection with the kidnapping of Sandy and Sharon's subsequent disappearance. At Long's trial, his lawyer theorized Sharon's family was hiding her due to familial issues concerning the, quote, American Indian movement. Not sure what was meant by that, but regardless, Long took a plea deal to avoid a possible death sentence. He was convicted of 2 life terms for the kidnapping and sexual assault charges, in addition to 6 to 8 years for aggravated assault charges, all to run concurrently. He would not be eligible for parole unless a governor commuted his sentence to a term of years. For Taylor Baldeagle, Long's sentence was a far cry from justice. He said, "I feel depressed. They will put this animal back on the streets in a little bit." At one point, Taylor was desperate enough for answers that he went to visit Long in prison, but when the man came to the window and saw Taylor, he walked away and refused to meet with him. So, now that you've been briefed on all of the victims, I want to address their possible connection. There may not be a connection between any of them, perhaps a few are connected and others not. We have no way of knowing for sure as of right now with the information available. However, there are undeniable similarities between the cases, which have led many to believe that this was all the work of a serial killer. Some suggested Ted Bundy was responsible since he was active in Colorado and Utah, and Wyoming sort of serves as a gateway between them, but other than that, there's not really anything to connect him. For many, Bundy isn't the strongest contender, though. Others believe that Royal Russell Long is connected to at least several of these victims, if not all 7, including the deaths of Jaylene Banker and Christy Gross, and the disappearances of Sharon Baldeagle, Carleen Brown, Deborah Meyer, Cinda Pallett, and Charlotte Kinsey. I'm only going to give brief, relevant information on Royal Russell Long, as I want the focus to still be on the victims, whether or not Long was involved. Long stood at 6 foot 3 inches tall and weighed about 220 pounds and was articulate despite only having an 8th grade level education. He had a reported history of sexual violence towards women, as evidenced in the Sandy Broken Leg case. A longtime resident of Rawlins, Wyoming in 1974, when the rodeo murders and disappearances occurred, Long was employed at several different carnivals and fairs and was a long-haul truck driver in the off-seasons. He owned a go-kart racing track in Casper at some point, and while serving time in prison in California for an unspecified crime, he became a trained meat cutter. Long's daughter claimed he molested her for years and that she'd seen him try to lure young girls into his car using stuffed animals at carnivals. She also says he told her the following: no girl older than 13 could satisfy him sexually, and that he could be caught standing over a body, gun in hand, and was clever enough to escape any justice. I don't know the validity of Long's daughter's statements or authorities' take on them. Long has only been an official suspect in the case of the disappearances of Sharon Baldeagle, Cinda Pallett, and Charlotte Kinsey. So why do so many see a connection between the rodeo tragedies and the 3 disappearances of Sharon, Cinda, and Charlotte? To begin connecting the dots, we'll go chronologically, starting with Rawlins in the summer of 1974, when Christy Gross, Carleen Brown, Jaylene Banker, and Deborah Meyer all went missing within the span of several weeks. Long lived in Rawlins at the time and was working at local fairs and carnivals. There's no known confirmation that he was at the fairs associated with the disappearances, so at this point, it's circumstantial. Then there's the obvious connection to Sharon Baldeagle, as we discussed at length, which leaves Cinda and Charlotte. In 1985, Long's ex-wife saw a composite sketch on a flyer posted in Casper, Wyoming, and the pictures of two missing girls from Oklahoma City. She thought the composite looked remarkably similar to her ex-husband and contacted her local police. Interestingly enough, Royal Russell Long was a familiar name to the Oklahoma City Police Department. He had been considered a suspect just a few days after the girls vanished, but was cleared of any involvement at the time. Still, Captain Bruce Shaw of the Oklahoma City Police Department said he considered Long a strong possible suspect. OKC detectives questioned Long prior to his final court date in the Sharon Baldeagle trial, and the parallels between his whereabouts and Cinda and Charlotte's disappearance were difficult to push aside. First, Long had ties to Oklahoma. He previously lived in a home in Tuttle and had relatives in the state. Long was actually in Oklahoma City on September 25th, 1981, to deliver a flatbed trailer to a local business, and he later admitted that he was at the Oklahoma State Fair a day later, the same day that Charlotte and Cinda vanished. He denied any involvement or knowledge of the girls' whereabouts. Several witnesses who'd seen Cinda and Charlotte with the bearded man picked Long's photograph from a lineup, and he certainly fit the physical description given in the composite. A man between 35 and 50 years of age, 6 feet 1 inch to 6 feet 3 inches tall, weighing 200 to 250 pounds with a stocky build, hairy muscular arms, and a full dark beard and mustache with gray streaks near his chin. Long stood at 6 foot 3 inches, weighed 220 pounds in addition to other obvious physical similarities. However, the two women who helped with the composite sketch failed to identify Long as the man they'd last seen with the girls. Oklahoma City authorities scheduled an in-person lineup for witnesses, including the two teenage boys who had last seen Cinda and Charlotte. Authorities and witnesses traveled to Wyoming, where Long was in custody, but upon arrival, were told that Long refused to stand for the lineup. His lawyer claims that OKCPD never contacted him to inform him of the trip or the lineup and said unless there was a court order, Long shouldn't have to appear. However, witnesses later saw Long in the courtroom. Investigators revealed Royal Russell Long rented a 1981 Pontiac Grand Prix during his time in Oklahoma in 1981, the same model the girls were last seen in. Records showed he'd added 400 miles to the car during his rental, but I wasn't able to find the duration of said rental. His Grand Prix was located in El Paso, Texas, and searched for evidence. The 13 scalp hairs found in the car were similar to Cinda Pallett and her pets, 3 dogs and 1 cat. Moving forward, keep in mind that this was all before the widespread use of DNA testing, so hairs were forensically analyzed to determine similarities, but couldn't be concretely confirmed a match. But the hairs weren't the most alarming find. A painted mat in the trunk of the car revealed traces of what authorities thought to be blood. Investigators sent the patterns to an expert, Ned Stewart of North Idaho College, but didn't tell him anything about the case or what they were looking for. After examining the patterns, Stewart believed that he was looking at the outline of either 1 large or 2 small bodies. However, during Long's trial, Stewart conceded that the blood outlines could be from animals and weren't definitively human. During a search of Long's home in Wyoming, detectives found a lock of blonde hair similar to Charlotte's, but further tests were inconclusive. Later searches of Long's hotel rooms, truck, former property in Tuttle, and the unearthing of a septic tank revealed nothing. Still, in August of 1985, authorities charge him with the kidnapping and first-degree murder of Cinda Pallett and Charlotte Kinsey. Oklahoma County's District Attorney Robert Macy said that the lack of remains would be the biggest challenge of proving their case, but that it wasn't impossible, as he'd previously won a case under similar circumstances. Long was represented in Oklahoma by attorney Mike Gassaway, to whom he revealed what he thought was a conspiracy against him concocted by Wyoming and Oklahoma police to see him convicted in both cases. According to Long, a jailhouse doctor in Wyoming told him he had a stomach ulcer and possibly stomach cancer, which he was told has a fatality rate of 95%. Long had no insurance and no money for medical care or cancer treatments. By accepting the plea deal on Sharon Baldeagle's case, he believed he would receive proper medical treatment. Long says he signed the plea agreement but wasn't told about the Oklahoma City investigation. After learning about it, Long suspected the supposed stomach cancer diagnosis was a ruse to get him to take the guilty plea in Sharon's trial to hasten the investigation in Oklahoma. Had he known about the new investigation, Long claims he would have rejected the plea bargain. District Attorney of Wyoming Scott Evans disagreed with Long's version of events. He said he only ever heard of Long's cancer from Long himself, and said that the OKCPD's inquiries didn't affect the plea bargain in any way. Oklahoma County District Attorney Robert Macy agreed that they were not in a rush to file charges against Long, citing time as a valuable tool for this particular case. Though they had enough evidence to file charges in February, Macy said, quote, "Royal Long is incarcerated in the state of Wyoming and he will not be released. It would be a mistake, I think, to rush in and file charges prematurely since we do have the time to develop the evidence we need," which is especially true considering that they would need to prove homicide without the remains as evidence. There was a lot of detailed newspaper coverage of each court date for Long's trial, so I'm going to do my best to present the events in chronological order. There's a lot of legal jargon as well, so apologies if I misspeak, as I'm not a lawyer, but I tried my best to get the gist of what's going on. So, Oklahoma City was granted temporary interstate custody of Long, and prosecution had until December 24th, 1985 to convict him. At the time, he would be sent back to Wyoming to serve his time for Sharon's case. August 29th, 1985, there's a 15-minute hearing. Long pleads innocent to the charges of murder and kidnapping. District Judge Niles Jackson denies Long bond and sets a preliminary hearing date for October 3rd. Long reportedly showed no emotion while the charges were read. October 3rd, 1985, the preliminary hearing begins. The prosecution's goal is to convince District Court Judge Stanley Pierce that they had enough evidence to move forward with a full trial. Macy, head of the prosecution, said that they had contacted 100 witnesses, several of which took the stand during this hearing. Cinda and Charlotte's relatives testified the girls were never known to run away. Johnny Pallett said Cinda was happy and that they never had any issues with her. He said police told him that they believed his daughter was dead and that none of the multiple sightings of Cinda had been substantiated. Norma Pallett talked about the last phone call that she'd had with Cinda. Her daughter asked if Charlotte could come over and spend the night after the fair, and said that they had gotten a job helping a man unload stuffed animals for $5 an hour. Norma agreed to the sleepover and told Cinda to call around 9 so that she would know where to pick them up. She never heard from her again. Perla Peterson also said Charlotte would not have run away, but under cross-examination, admitted her daughter had been depressed and 2 weeks before she went missing had tried to overdose on mild tranquilizers. Prosecutors said after Long departed with the girls, he stopped at a nearby store and purchased a roll of duct tape, similar to the tape that he had used to restrain Sandy Brokenleg and Sharon Baldeagle in Wyoming. October 7th, 1985, a carnival worker named Mary Popejoy took the stand. Mary said she saw Long the day in question while she manned a booth at the fair. Popejoy recognized Long immediately, as her sister had previously been married to him. Long had several marriages in his lifetime. The judge also heard from 2 girls who had been at the fair that day, Michelle Cohn and Michelle Haley. To avoid confusion, I will refer to Michelle Cohn as Michelle and Michelle Haley as Haley. The day in question, Michelle was 11 and Haley was 12. Michelle claimed that they were approached by a man who asked if they wanted to earn $5 an hour helping him unload stuffed animals. Michelle and Haley both identified Long as the man that they had spoken to, with Michelle noting that Long's hair had grayed and his beard was longer now, and that she remembered the belt he'd been wearing with the name Joseph tooled on the back. The girls spoke with Long for 30 minutes. Michelle said he was polite, while Haley described his behavior as erratic, and when Haley grew suspicious, she says Long gave her a $2 bill for her to buy herself a hot dog and told her to wait there. Long claimed that he needed a couple of books from the fair's office first, but Haley immediately noticed that he was leading Michelle in the wrong direction. She ran after them, asking Long more questions and wanting to talk to Michelle privately. Haley said, quote, "He had a funny look on his face, like he was shocked we had figured it out. It just didn't sound right, anything. The man I met just scared me so bad it's hard for a kid to forget anything like that." The girls told Long that they needed their parents' permission before they could help, and as they walked away, Long ran up and politely asked for his $2 bill back, which Haley had forgotten about. The girls' parents refused to let them help, and they didn't see Long again that day. Brian Head also testified. Brian and his friend Lance Rumsey went with Charlotte, Cinda, and the man to help unload the stuffed animals the day in question. Brian recalled that Long offered them the job and later approached Charlotte and Cinda to help. After getting in the man's vehicle, Lance Rumsey said he and Brian were immediately suspicious as he didn't seem to know where he was going to meet the truck. The man stopped at a discount store, then dropped the boys off at a truck stop, giving them each $10 to wait for the supposed truck with the stuffed animals. Brian watched Long drive away with the girls. The defense argued that when shown a color photo of Long taken around the time of the fair in 1981, Brian didn't identify him. He only identified Long in a photo taken 4 years after the incident. Tuesday, October 8, 1985. In a late testimony, a police technician claimed chemical tests revealed possible traces of blood in the Grand Prix Long had rented while in Oklahoma. Wednesday, October 9th, 1985, day 4 of preliminaries saw Sandy Broken Leg return to the stand to recount her kidnapping by Long the year prior. Sandy's testimony hadn't changed from the trial in Wyoming. Prosecution presented car rental records which showed a man identifying himself as Roy R. Long rented a light brown 1981 Pontiac Grand Prix near the time of the fair from the Will Rogers World Airport. Ernest Smith, a document examiner for the State Narcotics Bureau, confirmed the handwriting on the form and Long's handwriting sample were a match. Ned Stewart of the Regional Crime Lab in Ohio, who conducted the 3 chemical tests on the mat found in the trunk of the rental car, testified that, quote, "Based on the battery of tests, it is my opinion that what I observed on the mat was blood." When the defense tried to call into question the tests, saying that the chemicals also reacted with other substances, Stewart clarified that, quote, "No substances react positively with all 3 tests except for blood. The pattern I observed on this mat would be consistent with the pattern I would expect to see from one or more bodies with multiple leaking." However, Stewart conceded that he had no way of knowing if the blood on the mat was human or animal, as I mentioned before. Janice Davis, a police chemist with the Oklahoma City Police Department, told the judge that she compared 4 of the 27 hairs found in the trunk to a hairbrush from Cinda's home. She said the hairs were very similar, but admitted to the defense they could belong to another family member. Davis indicated that the animal hairs found in the rental car were similar to hairs from Cinda's pets, saying, "For anyone to be in contact with these 4 or 5 sources other than Cinda Pallett, it would be almost non-existent." The lock of blonde hair found in a sealed bag in between the pages of a photo album in storage in Long's Evansville trailer were also similar, quote, "in all microscopic characteristics to a clipping of Charlotte's hair given to police by her grandmother." The defense argued that the hair samples weren't a positive, uncontested method of positive ID in any case, which was true at the time. Thursday, October 10th, 1985. District Court Judge Stanley Pierce decides Long will stand trial on 2 counts of first-degree murder. However, Pierce thought prosecutors didn't have enough evidence to indicate Cinda and Charlotte were confined and didn't go with Long of their own volition, so the kidnapping charges were dropped. He ruled that Sandy Brokenleg's testimony was inadmissible due to a lack of similarities between her assault and Cinda and Charlotte's disappearance. Long was to be arraigned on October 17th with a November trial expected. However, the arraignment was postponed. Prosecution filed an appeal to reinstate the kidnapping charges. October 18, 1985, Judge David Cook hears the prosecution's appeal and orders the reinstatement of the kidnapping charges, and says the lack of similarities in Sandy's testimony did not mandate it being excluded from the trial. Long pled innocent to Judge Freeman on 2 counts of murder, 2 counts of kidnapping, and 2 counts of felony murder. Freeman set his trial date for December 9th and ordered Long held without bond. Further motions for the case would take place in late November. Before the first trial date, Oklahoma County District Judge Charles Owens said the hair and body samples taken from Long in Wyoming were not to be used during the trial. Authorities had obtained a search, but Oklahoma law requires investigators to also submit a formal application to the court beforehand, and the defendant can oppose the application. Authorities also needed probable cause that samples could be connected to a crime, both of which they neglected to do. Owens said he would allow a motion to resubmit new samples as long as they were taken in accordance with Oklahoma law. Despite this, Judge Owens also dismissed motions from the defense, including one to suppress evidence seized during the search of Long's Wyoming mobile home. As for the motion to dismiss the murder charges, Owens said he would rule on that after hearing the evidence at trial. So, everything we have covered so far in preliminary hearings is represented at trial in front of Judge Owens, in addition to some new information and arguments. Authorities draw similarities between the duct tape bought in Oklahoma and the tape bought and used to restrain Long's victims in Wyoming. Further attempts to analyze the blood found on the mat in the back of the car were inconclusive. Michelle and Haley testified that they had seen Long speaking to others before he'd approached them, causing the prosecution to allege that Long, quote, prowled the fair looking for victims. The girls also identified a hat authorities found in Long's home as the same one the bearded man wore the day in question. Judge Owens prohibited Lance Rumsey from taking the stand, citing that because he had been hypnotized 2 days following the girl's disappearance, Lance couldn't reliably separate suggestion from what he actually remembered. Owens also did not allow Sandy Brokenleg to testify, despite the appeals judge ruling otherwise. Owens saw no visible connection between the case in Wyoming and Cinda and Charlotte's disappearance, since there was no concrete evidence indicating he had actually confined the missing girls, or that he sexually attacked them, saying, quote, such a testimony would only serve to possibly prejudice this defendant by permitting the jury to speculate that he may be guilty of the crimes charged in the state of Oklahoma because he might have committed some other offenses in the state of Wyoming. Mary Popejoy, Long's ex-sister-in-law, couldn't recall if she had seen and spoken to Long at the fair's first weekend or closing weekend. Owens also refused to hear any discussion of conversations Long's ex-wife and Popejoy had concerning his sexual tendencies towards young girls. Owens felt the conversation, which happened a decade earlier, was far too removed from the present case since there was no evidence to suggest the girls were sexually assaulted, and said it was highly prejudicial to Long. Long's daughter also didn't get to testify concerning her molestation claims and allegations that she witnessed him try to lure young girls into his car using stuffed animals at various carnivals in the past. All of this was obviously a hard blow to the prosecution, who felt the testimonies showed motive for kidnapping and aided in their case for the death penalty. During the trial, Long reportedly taunted Charlotte and Cinda's families, saying he was the only one who knew the truth of their disappearances. His exact wording isn't quoted in any source that I could find. During closing arguments, the defense asked Judge Owens to dismiss the murder and kidnapping charges against Long, with the decision to be made on Wednesday, December 18, 1985. The prosecution fully expected to move forward with the trial, but to the family's horror, Owens drops both the murder and kidnapping charges, citing, quote, many unaddressed and unanswered questions and a lack of sufficient proof for either charge. The case and jury are dismissed. The jury agreed that they couldn't convict Long on the evidence presented. However, after jurors later learned of the witnesses not allowed to take the stand, at least one said that the testimonies could have turned the case around. Despite Owens claiming that this was the most complex case he'd had in his 17 years as a judge, Charlotte's mother vowed to see him removed from his position for the dismissal. Both John Pallett and District Attorney Macy expressed concerns that Owens dismissed the charges instead of allowing the jury to decide Long's guilt or innocence. Macy said, quote, I feel that this ruling today flies in the face of everything I believe in as a prosecutor. I think this is a black day for this county. Thursday, December 19, 1985, Michael Gassaway reads a statement from Long to the press saying, I was at the State Fair in 1981 to talk to my ex-mother-in-law about opening a savings account for my children, and that was my sole purpose of being there. I am innocent of any charges in Oklahoma. Gassaway added that Long never had contact with Cinda or Charlotte and said the following of the dismissed case. If required, we were ready to prove Pallett and Kinsey were alive today. We would have done this if necessary, not by innuendo, lies, and inadmissible evidence like the DA wanted to use, but by hard evidence such as witnesses who have been with the girls as recently as several months ago, and with photos of them taken last year. We have no way of knowing if the photos in question are of Cinda and Charlotte. To my knowledge, they've never been publicly released. We also have no way of knowing if the defense's supposed witnesses actually encountered the girls. Long returned to Wyoming to carry out the rest of his sentence for the Sharon Baldeagle case. August of 1986, the Daily Oklahoma newspaper publishes a disturbing letter Long sent them, reading, Your basic assumption is correct, in that there is a story that demands to be told, a mystery to be solved, and yes, I do hold the keys. I had been previously approached by others in regards to the same matter, but I did not respond to their inquiries. I have responded to your inquiry because A. Your publication did not attempt to crucify me prior to trial, B. The time has come for the truth to be published, C. I am in need of money. Long made several demands in exchange for his story. An advance of $2,500 as a gesture of good faith, and to cover the first 20 hours of interviews, and another $2,500 for every 20 hours after that. He demanded $150 for each photo of him and author's earnings for any future book deals. Other terms included legal defense at the expense of the publication should any criminal charges or lawsuits rise from his story. Executive editor Jim Standard said, We have no plans to pay money to a known liar and child molester so he can profit from his crimes. Standard offered to pay the money Long demanded to Wyoming's Victims Relief Fund should he provide the location of the girls or their remains, and expressed ethical concerns over his terms. Long also claimed to have politically destructive information about his former attorney, Mike Gassaway, now a candidate for District Attorney of Oklahoma County. Long's letter demanded $1,000, claiming Long paid Gassaway that amount to aid him in a legal matter in Wyoming, but Gassaway never showed. Gassaway denied these claims, saying that Long was crazy and he had never been paid $1,000 and never agreed to provide legal aid in Wyoming. Though Gassaway took Long's Oklahoma case on as a public service, he set a $150,000 fee, but said, quote, If I ever get any money, fine. If I don't, fine. The only payment Gassaway received from Long was $5,000 from Long's girlfriend during the trial. Gassaway added that Long's history shows he's a psychopath who was capable of lying, all while, quote, making it appear that he isn't. Yet he emphasized the investigation of Cinda and Charlotte's case convinced him Long was innocent in that regard. Long sent a response to the Daily Oklahoman, reducing his advance to $1,500 and chastising the publication for its lack of sincerity in negotiating with him. As if Long's attempts to sell his story weren't callous and calculating enough, he also hand-wrote a letter to Cinda's mother that read, "I have never as much seen your daughter. I did not leave the fairgrounds with her. My heart cries for you in your grief. If I were responsible in any way, I would do all in my power to help you. Try to visualize the horror of facing the possibility of being convicted and put to death for something of which you are totally and completely innocent. That was a trammeling experience, still remembered in the quiet of the night. My life at this present time is in shambles. If I am unable to clear up other matters, I may spend the remainder of my life in prison. God has forgave me for the wrongs I have done." As for District Attorney Macy's response to the various letters and demands, he said, "I have always believed and still believe that Long holds the key and that he and he alone knows where the girls' bodies are. I think Long is a very clever con man. I was hoping that maybe he would be willing to solve the mystery for the money involved, but more and more I am convinced he was trying to rip off the Daily Oklahoman. Knowing him to be as intelligent as he is, I can't conceive that he would actually confess to the kidnappings and killings." In November of 1993, Royal Russell Long collapses in the yard of the Wyoming State Penitentiary. He is over 8 years into his sentence for the charges in Sharon and Sandy's case when his heart attack claims his life on the 3rd. District Attorney Macy's reaction was the following. His secrets probably died with him, including the location of those girls' bodies. I never had any doubts he was guilty. Now I know that he will never hurt another little girl. Charlotte's father, Otis, said, "We are satisfied in our own minds he was the one who killed them. I wish we could have sat down with him before he died and be totally honest with us. We hoped he'd tell us what he did with the girls." While Norma Pallett spared no tears for the man, she said, "I don't suppose we will ever put it to rest. It kept both of us very upset for many years. We learned to live with it." Prosecutors planned to obtain Long's prison files, hoping he left some sort of clue behind, but it seems as of now, no new information has come of this. District Attorney Ray Elliott says based on the information provided by Long's daughter concerning his inclination towards young girls, he believes Long was a serial killer with possibly hundreds of victims throughout his lifetime. Elliott says he tracked down more than half a dozen girls in various states who remembered Long approaching them. Since then, all the way from Rawlins, Wyoming to Oklahoma City, communities, law enforcement officers, and families have all grieved in their own way for their lost daughters. 2 families had their daughters' remains, but no answers. 19-year-old Christy Gross and 10-year-old Jaylene Dawn Banker vanished in the summer of 1974. Their remains were discovered in the subsequent years, both deaths ruled as a homicide from severe blows to the head. Their murders remain unsolved. 2 other families remain haunted by their girls' disappearances from Rawlins. 19-year-old Carlene Brown's entire adoptive family has reportedly passed away without any of them learning the truth. 14-year-old Deborah Ray Meyer hasn't been seen in almost 45 years. Foul play is suspected in their disappearances. Janet Franson, a technician at the University of North Texas for Human Identification, believed Long was responsible for both Carlene Brown's disappearance and Christy Gross's murder, and hopes to track down Carlene's biological family to obtain DNA samples for comparisons to known Jane Does. The case of the Rawlins Four still remains unsolved. 19-year-old Carlene Brown was 5 feet to 5 feet 3 inches tall when she went missing. She was a white female with brown hair and eyes and had a surgical scars on both of her big toes. 14-year-old Deborah Ray Meyer stood at 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighed 115 pounds. She had brown hair and eyes and a small circular pencil eraser-sized growth on her left ear, and she wore a full set of dentures. If you have any information on the murders of Jaylene Dawn Banker or Christy Gross, or the disappearances of Carlene Brown or Deborah Ray Meyer, please contact the Carbon County Sheriff's Department at 307-324-2776. Charlotte's mother, Perla Peterson, spent 8 years maintaining her daughter's room exactly as it had been when she vanished. She hoped Charlotte would return home and life would resume, but things were never normal again. In May of 1983, Perla participated in the National Child Search, a group that provides information to missing children's loved ones about what efforts they could make to find them. Otis Kinsey spent many sleepless nights traveling the country, even down to Mexico, spending his own money and time to garner tips of his daughter's disappearance, but always returned home empty-handed. Cinda Pallett's family never received the closure they so desperately craved, and never knew the truth of Cinda's disappearance, or got to say a final proper goodbye. Both Cinda and Charlotte's disappearances are classified as unsolved, non-family abductions. Authorities believe the girls' remains are within Oklahoma state lines. District Attorney Ray Elliott believes the bodies are within 45 miles of Oklahoma City, concealed in a hole in a field somewhere near where Long delivered equipment to oil drilling rigs. Authorities believe the chance of finding their remains are slim, as there are tens of thousands of these types of holes, most of which were capped off with concrete and forgotten. Cinda Pallett stood at 5 feet, weighed 88 pounds, was of Mexican heritage, and was 13 years old when she disappeared. She was last seen wearing a white t-shirt jersey with dark blue sleeves. It had a ZZ Top logo on the front and the number 81 on the back. She wore size 12 slim blue jeans, a rope belt made of braided orange or rust-colored nylon with a leather buckle. Her name also was tooled into it. On her feet were two-toned blue Nike sneakers with black waffle soles. Her hair and eyes were brown, and she had a small scar below the corner of her left eyebrow. She wore a dental retainer behind her lower front teeth. She had previously broken her collarbone, but it had healed by the time that she disappeared. Charlotte Kinsey also stood at 5 feet and weighed 100 pounds. She was also 13. She was last seen wearing a dark maroon short-sleeved pullover blouse with stripes on the sleeves and neck. She wore blue jeans, Nike sneakers, and a wedding band-type ring on her right ring finger. Charlotte had blonde hair and blue-gray eyes, and she had a scar below her left eye caused by pencil lead. She had silver caps on her lower front teeth. Her ears were pierced, and she had a triangular-shaped birthmark on her lower back. If you have any information on the disappearances of either Cinda or Charlotte, the number provided on their Charlie Project page says to please contact the Oklahoma State Police Department at 405-232-5311. However, I looked up that number and I'm not sure if it's still active, so I've looked up another one directly from the department's website. You can also call 405-231-2121. Sharon Baldeagle's father, Taylor Baldeagle, has also traveled well beyond Wyoming, all over the country, searching for his missing daughter. He said his 9-year-old son offered comfort, prayers, and told him that she would be back someday. He prayed the same before every meal. His motto of "Don't give up" also helped him through a heart attack in 1993 and chemotherapy for colon cancer. I'm unsure if he is still alive today, however. Sharon Baldeagle was 12 when she was taken by Royal Russell Long. She stood at 5 feet 3 inches tall and weighed 110 pounds. She is of American Indian heritage with black hair and brown eyes. She has pierced ears and was last seen wearing a black and yellow top with a tiger stripe pattern, black shoes, and carrying a red bag. If you have any information on her whereabouts or the circumstances of her disappearance, please contact the Fall River County Sheriff's Office at 605-745-4444. Special thanks to the Patreon family who have waited for this video for about a year, obviously. Thank you for your patience, but also your support of this channel while while we still had Patreon, which ended back in the end of March, no matter how long you were a contributor. But I also want to thank everyone in the audience, obviously. Everyone, whether you've been a patron or not, whether you've just been around, whether you bought merch or not, I don't care. If you're here watching this, thank you. Your words of support after I announced that I was leaving for my mental health have meant more than I can express properly in words. Sorry, I just bumped the mic. So thank you from the deepest part of my heart. This journey wouldn't have been the same without any of you, obviously, and thank you for caring about these victims and their stories. Specifically, thank you today for listening to the stories of Carlene Brown, Christy Gross, Deborah Ray Meyer, Jaylene Dawn Banker, Sharon Baldeagle, Sandy Broken Leg, as well as Cinda Pallett and Charlotte Kinsey. The number of people touched by these tragedies is vast, including communities, law enforcement, attorneys, and of course their families. My heart goes out to all of them, and I know you all extend your sympathies as well. And as well as your hopes for closure for them. If you're looking for a smaller video to watch, just with a little bit of extra information, on Charlotte and Cinda's case, specifically, I have linked a news report down in the description. It's called A Father's Quest. No matter what you choose to believe or what you speculate, I ask you for respect down below, as always, and I am so proud to say that that is all this community has ever shown. And before we close out with the saying, I want to remind you all that there will be one more video coming soon. I'm going to look over all of the cases we have covered on the channel and provide any updates that have been had on them since their posting. After that, we'll do a final goodbye live stream. I'll announce, I can't talk. I'll announce that date closer to when we know when the final video is done. But as for the last episode of this series, as you move on, wherever you go to hear these victims' stories, please remember that while these may be dark matters, the darkness always matters. Stay safe, friends, and have a good night.